Hi, everybody, and welcome back for episode 5 of Depression Vacation. I'm Hal.
And I am Shannon.
And we have a special guest with us actually here tonight, or this afternoon. Special guest, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Wallace. I'm Hal's friend,
And my new friend.
Yeah!
Wallace, who is a filmmaker extraordinaire, very huge connoisseur of movies in general, and just all-around great guy. So, welcome to Depression Vacation, Wallace. We're glad to have you.
I could not ask for a better introduction. It is a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So Shannon and I were talking after the last couple of episodes, and we've been very heavy with a lot of depression issues on a podcast called Depression Vacation for the last few episodes.
I am shocked.
What? We talked about our trauma? Oh, no.
Yeah. In fact, Shannon was saying her grandma even, talked to her after one of the episodes.
Well, she would have talked to me if we were on speaking terms.
But so Shannon and I were coming together, and since this will be the Halloween podcast, we decided to talk about movies because all of us being frequent filmmakers, vidjammers, whatnot, we all love movies, and this is a great onus to talk about horror movies in general. Mm-hmm. So, before we even get into that, I did want to follow up on one small thing that we talked about last week, because a couple of people have been asking me this via various messages. As I've gone through the adjustment period, I started anxiety medication, Wallace. I don't know if I've mentioned this to you. Yeah, big thumbs up. It was a very odd adjustment period for about the first week and a half, I want to say. And one of the more, striking things that somebody, so there's a little bit of feedback.
I heard it here a little bit, yeah.
What happened with me... mostly I'm feeling pretty good, feeling a lot calmer and more able to get things done because I'm not just nervous about doing things all the time. But so I'm on the lottery, for everybody who doesn't know. I'm one of the people who draws the balls. And the couple of times I've been the person drawing the balls, this happened the first time 3 days into taking Zoloft. Right when we were about to go live, with 40 seconds left, my heart rate spiked and I felt incredibly faint. And I was actually slightly worried, I was like, oh, this is the worst possible time. I'm going to faint on the lottery, for the balls.
To be honest, I have felt that way when I'm drawing balls as well.
Yeah.
So.
Can you put drawing balls on your resume, Hal, please?
It is. Well,
okay.
The funny thing is, too, so the girl I'm dating right now, I use a lot of voice to text with my text because I'm lazy, and I also have giant fingers that don't text very well. And whenever I tell her lottery balls, for some reason it turns them to watery balls, and she finds that to be the funniest thing in the world. It's
it is.
Yeah, Hal,
the funniest thing in the world.
Talk about your watery balls to me more, please. But yeah, overall, the heart rate thing has happened a couple of times, and another one of my coworkers who has gone through something similar has said something like, you probably don't recognize it, but because you've done it hundreds of times, but whenever you are going live on TV, there probably is an adrenaline spike that you just don't even notice. And that, combined with adjusting to anxiety medication, probably just sent your heart into a tizzy, which it did, and it's better now. But, so far, I'm a big fan, feeling a lot better, and hopefully it continues.
Good. I'm glad to hear that, Hal.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that.
You're very welcome. It's mostly just because a ton of people have asked me.
I'm just glad we have a ton of people that would ask you that are listening. So I actually wanted to take a minute because we were talking about this earlier to thank everyone who's listened to the first 4 episodes. You've really kind of validated Hal and I in continuing to do this. So thank you to our listeners. So I just wanted to make sure you guys feel appreciated.
Yeah, we love you all. So yeah, so far it seems like we're averaging 30 listeners a podcast, so which is not too bad for just our friends and family. So thank you all.
I didn't know I had 30 friends and family.
Me neither.
Yeah, I listened to the last 2 episodes, which, by the way, thank you for the shout out. That was very kind in the last one.
Oh, yeah.
And unexpected. And I gotta say, not enough people talk about this stuff. Not enough people talk about family trauma. Not enough people talk about depression, anxiety. And we'll probably end up talking about this a little bit because in horror cinema, that is core to a lot of really great horror movies.
Oh, I guess this is a good segue here, too, because 2 of the movies I like to watch around Halloween time all over, which I'll talk about one of them a lot more when we talk about movies we like, are the houses that October built, and there's it's called like Art of the Scare, which is a documentary about haunted houses specifically and like their origin and some of the like more extreme ones that exist now. And in the sequel to Houses That October Built, they actually have a fear trauma counselor come in and talk to one of the characters at Eastern State Penitentiary too. So Pennsylvania, what up? But when I was watching Art of the Scare, I never realized, because I watched them back to back, they brought in the same woman to talk about exactly like what the trauma reflex is for, she calls it voluntary trauma reflex, because obviously you voluntarily go into a haunted house. But she talked a lot about like what the triggering events for that are, like why it's an adrenaline spike to people, why people enjoy it, and like why it makes you feel good afterwards because you're safe in a controlled environment. So
interesting.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting like sort of they talked about this too in the found footage documentary that I watched too, because they were talking about like part of the reason found footage works so well is that you are seeing it from the point of view of somebody who's diegetically inside of the movie.
I got some more feedback.
Yeah, somebody's like, is that maybe your computer?
Could it be the laptop that I have?
Possibly.
Open?
Try
Here.
Closing it.
Let's see if does it go away?
A little.
A little.
I still kind of hear it.
It's the ghosts.
It's a haunted podcast. Spooky.
It's a little better now, I guess. But
all right, let me take this away from the
that's
mic.
what you get for over preparing.
I know, right?
Now it's just going to have to be on the cusp. But yeah,
now you're going to have to, bum it with the rest of us.
So I guess since we have done the intro at this point, let's just get right to it and talk about the movies that everybody likes.
Well, can I actually start off with my rant?
Yes, please.
Okay, listen. So I had mentioned this a couple episodes back, and somebody, one of our listeners, had said, like, I need to know Shannon's beef with the Conjuring movies. And I was like, I will tell you my beef. I got you. It's specifically with the most recent Conjuring film. My problem with the Conjuring films overall is the glorification of Ed and Lorraine Warren.
Yeah.
Due to my background, I just have a lot of anger around, like, paranormal investigating and just the idea that, because I don't believe in ghosts and I don't believe in demons or anything like that. And when you try to breach that in real life, like so much real shit gets like brushed underneath the rug and chalked up to the supernatural when there could be real issues going on. And so but I have this cognitive dissonance because I fucking love those movies.
They're so
They are so well done. And I love the acting, I love the storytelling, and so what I've had to do to watch those movies is give myself a certain level of like suspension of disbelief and just be like, okay, don't get caught up on the fact that this is quote unquote based on a true story and all that stuff. Like don't get into it.
Oh my god, that kind of reminds me of. Do you ever hear Mitch Hedberg's rant about like inspired by a true story? That bit.
No.
It was sort of like, inspired by a true story is complete bullshit. I ate a tomato sandwich the other day, and it inspired me to think of a story about a monster that went around flying around in the universe.
No,
anything can be inspired by a true story.
Well, and the backstory, from what I understand, with the Conjuring, the real Conjuring folks, is that they kind of took advantage of people.
They did.
Oh yeah, they were hucksters.
And they they did some questionable things to kind of like juice up, amp up, some would say fabricate these ghost stories that they were telling.
Well, I guess Amityville is the biggest one that they like made their bones on. And I went to school actually in Long Island, like maybe 30 minutes away from the Amity house. And we did take a trip out there, and the entire place, like for one, the hexagonal window or whatever it was, completely gone. And they've reconstructed the house so much so people deliberately won't be able to find it. And it seems like it was pretty much just a family in over their heads looking for a reason to get out of their mortgage.
Yeah, and to expand on that, I'm also a little suspect of anyone who claims to have, personal knowledge or expertise in anything supernatural.
Yeah.
Including, I believe that there are things that we can't explain. Unfortunately, to become a celebrity psychic, for example, like Sylvia Brown, you have to be a good show person.
Yeah.
You have to be able to have those skills.
That itself lends to the discredibility of those people.
Sure.
And that was something that, my mom was going and trying to convince people that she was a medium, trying to convince people all sorts of different things. And so that's why I have like a personal vendetta against this whole like psychic medium kind of nonsense. But what got me about The Conjuring, the most recent film, The Devil Made Me Do It, and pissed me off like way more than any other Conjuring film, was that the premise of the film, and I know how you haven't seen it, and you, Wallace, you haven't seen it either, correct?
I've only seen the first Conjuring movie. I haven't seen any of the follow-ups.
Okay. So, I mean, I won't, like, spoil it, or I don't know, but I'm going to kind of spoil it.
Maybe not for the audience, yeah.
It kind of feels like a misnomer to say spoil, because they're all kind of cut from the same cloth. They have the same beats in every movie.
Exactly.
Oh, there's a ghost. Oh, only the Warrens can help them.
Right.
Oh, someone gets possessed. Oh, Catholic Church.
Yeah. So what was different about this film, and I have a vendetta against any movie franchise that does this, and I have another horror movie that I will also tell you my rant about. But my problem with The Conjuring and the Saw franchise, which I'll get into then, is that they set themselves up for such a great model. The storytelling in the first couple of films was so fantastically done. You did have that sense that like it was fictionalized. Mm-hmm. The problem with The Devil Made Me Do It is that it is based off of, and I'm going to pull it up here just so I have everything right, the trial of Arnie Cheyenne Johnson. And it was the first trial that breached the question of, is possession a case you can make in court in terms of you commit a murder. The devil made me do it. Mm-hmm. So that, it is an interesting case, and it's a very as for me, it's like, oh fuck, come on. The devil made me do it. Seriously.
I wonder if it's the same case that they based The Exorcism of Emily Rose on too, because that was, I don't know if you've seen that movie, but that very similar to The Conjuring, except more religious. 18-year-old super Catholic Hal really was terribly moved, like very moved by that movie. But it was like based on an event in which somebody died in an exorcism, and the priest tried that defense in court. So it might have been based off of the same person.
I think it might be separate, because what happened in this particular situation is that there's the Arnie is dating the daughter of this family, and her brother is possessed by a demon. And so when they go to exorcise the brother, the demon pops out of the brother and latches onto Arnie. And then Arnie then moves forward to murder his landlord after a fight. And so Ed and Lorraine Warren were involved in this case, and they were trying to prove that Arnie Johnson had been possessed, and that, that's what led him to kill this person, which on its own is a ridiculous thing. But the film added this entire other element that is not even remotely based in any kind of truth. They added this whole storyline about an occultist and his daughter who was super into the occult, and she had placed a curse on Arnie, and then Ed and Lorraine Warren show up and basically murder her.
Oh.
And that whole part of it pissed me off, because first of all, I felt like it went too far in the terms of heroizing Ed and Lorraine Warren, and it also, I felt like, and I know this probably wasn't the purpose of the film, but there wasn't enough skepticism in the sense that the way the movie portrayed people who questioned it villainized those people.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of I guess it's sort of like the phenomenon where Skylar from Breaking Bad is villainized by the fans of the show, even though she's the sane one who's against her husband selling meth. It's just if your main character and the person you're identifying is the one who's trying to break bad, you'd hate everybody who's trying to keep him from breaking bad. So if Ed and Lorraine Warren are the heroes of the story, the rational people questioning their methods have to be the villains, just because of the way the movie works out.
And there are, and I don't think it was just in the most recent film, but they reenacted moments where they were questioned in public, on stage for talk shows, things like that, where they were called out on their bullshit. And in the films, Ed is like coming home being like, oh, they don't know what they're talking about. They're going to get people killed or whatever. But what really, in a storytelling and in a setting the stage for the stories, the reason why I picked that one in particular is because all of the other Conjuring films, the adversary was a demon or was a ghost or a poltergeist, whatever. Mm-hmm. But in this particular film, they diverged from that, and they made it so that there was a real person making these things happen. And then they go and they show up and they basically murder that person. And that's what really turned me off to that film, was that, okay, I can deal with, fighting a make-believe monster. I cannot, be okay with, based off of a true story, you going and killing someone that you think is a witch.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's essentially creating an alternate reality where Jeffrey Dahmer was possessed by the devil, and that justifies all of the things that he did.
Right.
So, yeah, I get your beef with this. I wish I'd seen it so that I could agree with you, but
yeah. Well, you watch it and then agree with me.
Yeah, I'll watch it. I've been going through all of the scary movies this entire last couple of weeks because I forgot I subscribed to Shudder last year, also around Halloween time, and have been paying a year of Shudder dues without realizing it. So might as well get them all out now.
Yeah. So that's my beef, and now other people may state their cases for other films.
I don't have a ton of horror movies I dislike. When we were talking about this, the only two I could think of I really hated were Blair Witch 2 and Halloween Resurrection. As a kid, I really didn't like Halloween 3 because I was super into the Halloween movies growing up, and that was the one that took us away from Michael Myers, and it was critically panned and everything. But apparently there's a huge critical reevaluation of Halloween 3 at this point.
I'm part of that.
You think so? Halloween 3 is a good movie to you, or
I don't think it's not a great movie. It's certainly nowhere near my favorite movies of all time.
Oh yeah.
But backstory, I don't really like slasher flicks. They're not the kind of horror that I get into. The blood and the guts and the viscera and it's jumping out from behind the corner. I understand why people love it. That kind of that thrill, that vicarious thrill that you get watching someone lurking in the dark and coming out and killing people. But I think it's really fascinating that they took a left turn completely away from the franchise, what was making them money, and made such a strange film.
Yeah. Well, John Carpenter is somebody I consider to be an artist in every way, shape, and form. And I remember reading an interview with him because he lost control of the series to Mustafa Akkad after that. And they just went back to doing Michael slasher movies until the end of eternity. And he was saying the concept of Halloween, he thought, should not have been tied to just one masked serial killer when the genre was starting to get overflown with mass serial killers. He was saying the concept of Halloween is just all around scariness. There's hundreds of stories you could tell under the umbrella of Halloween. Mm-hmm. So he tried to tell one of those stories and promptly lost control.
He was Ryan Murphy before there was a Ryan Murphy.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. But I kind of like, especially the new generation, Eli Roth and those kinds of, really, I almost think of it as kind of sadistic violence that's being portrayed on screen in some of the latter day slasher flicks. I don't want to be the grumpy uncle being like, no, you can't show that. But there's something that just it strikes me as almost inhumane about it. You strip the victims of their humanity, and you're just kind of watching people die. And I personally, I prefer horror that is rooted in the human experience because, as you both know, and I know just from personal life, the stuff that happens inside a family, the stuff that happens in your own house is very often far more terrifying than what might happen from an escaped, convict or someone who's escaped from the psychiatric institute. I enjoy Halloween. I think it's a masterful film, for example, but it's not even my favorite of Carpenter's movies, in part because of that reason, because it almost, there are parts of it that just seem very gratuitous, which is the point. And it takes the humanity away from these teens who did not really do anything wrong.
Yeah.
And Halloween isn't the worst offender of this, obviously. There are all these tropes that we're familiar with where, the person who has sex is the one who dies first.
Yeah.
The minorities are the first people to die in most slasher movies. Like that, those kind of tropes are, in some sense, I think, the worst of our humanity being projected back at us, and not necessarily in a way that's self-knowing.
It's like a dark mirror reflecting your worst things. And that's the real horror of a horror movie, I guess.
For me, I've seen the original Halloween film. I haven't. And then fast forward, I have seen the two. No, I'm sorry. Now there's three, but I haven't seen Halloween Ends yet.
Oh, I haven't seen any of the Noah Baumbach ones, but I hear they're pretty good as far as they go.
So I loved the first one, the one that they released in whenever it was, but the reboot, and. Just loved it. Had a great time. Loved fucking Jamie Lee Curtis. She's a master. Always my final girl. But I do have a particular opinion about the second one, Halloween Kills, and what pissed me off about that movie, see, I have a lot of opinions. What pissed me off about that movie is that they had told the entire universe that we're going to do a trilogy. It's going to be a trilogy of films. We're going to get Halloween, Halloween Kills, Halloween Ends. Like, they told us that up front. And then the entirety of Halloween Kills is people going around being like, it ends tonight. It ends tonight. Michael Myers is dying tonight. And I was like, bro, I know there's another movie. You told me there was going to be another movie. I mean, it's one thing if you hadn't told me there was going to be another movie, I might have believed you, on top of the fact that, of course he's not dying tonight because he's fucking Michael Myers, and that's the whole point.
He never dies.
He never dies.
Well, spoiler alert, I have the same issue with a lot of superhero movies. There's no suspense because the heroes are always going to win.
Exactly.
I knew they were all coming back in Avengers Endgame, so, all except one.
I will say for the Halloween reboot, which I've only seen the first of the reboots and the last of the reboots, which FYI, it's not my place as guest to correct the host, but it wasn't Noah Baumbach, it was David Gordon Green.
I get my indie directors so confused. Please do correct me, when I get...
How you're fired.
Although I would love to see a Noah Baumbach slasher flick. It would perhaps be aimed squarely for my wheelhouse.
You know what? I totally just made an idiot of myself because I was telling somebody else the other night. I'm like, oh yeah, he's done mostly indie films like Francis Ha, and it's interesting that he did this. I'm like, oh man,
David Gordon Green. It makes a lot more sense for him to do the Halloween movies because he's done a lot more genre picks. He did. What was that one? The stoner flick. Anyway, I'm getting us off course. Cut all of this out, including me correcting you.
No, it all goes on there because I'm too lazy to edit.
We don't edit this podcast. This is the raw, uncut version of Depression Vacation.
Going back to what Shannon said, though, an interesting concept, you were saying in the second movie, you knew Michael Myers wasn't going to die. Mm-hmm. But going to a different reboot of the Michael Myers saga with the Rob Zombie Halloween experience, that seemed to be where it was going. Have you both seen the two Halloweens that Rob Zombie directed? Or?
No.
Yeah.
So the very end of Halloween 2, I think Michael dies. It was not a great movie, so I didn't watch it again. But it ends with Laurie Strode in a mental hospital with the ghost of her and Michael's mother approaching her with the same fervor that she's been approaching Michael the entire movie. So the implication is that she would be the one to take up the mantle of Michael Myers after she's been terrorized for 2 movies. And I was thinking that could have been an interesting in Halloween Kills, maybe Michael did die and then Jamie Lee Curtis took up the mantle.
Well, I actually, the first of this latest trilogy of Halloween kind of reboots, I thought the first one was very clever. I actually appreciated what it was doing. It was showing you the consequences to Laurie Strode. That this woman is kind of hollowed out. She's clearly traumatized.
And she's living in fear, but also has hardened herself so much that she turned that fear into other consequences too. So, the fact that she's so isolated, the fact that she's basically isolated her daughter and her granddaughter, and made them kind of treat her as an outsider for the same reasons that she feels like an outsider.
Yeah. It's kind of textbook intergenerational trauma. Lori was traumatized, and then she goes on to make her daughter and her granddaughter's lives kind of to pass on that trauma from one generation to the next. I didn't see the second one, but my understanding is they veered way off course.
Oh, they did.
From that.
Listen, if I had paid money for that movie, I would have been really upset. But not that I stole it, but I just
we all stream everything these days anyway. I know what you meant by that.
Oh well, it's the answer is because my friend works for a movie theater chain and she gets me free movies, so that's so I get to do whatever I want. Anyway, I do want to go back to, and I hope I'm not veering away from Halloween too early in this conversation. So if I am,
I think we've said enough about Halloween.
Okay. I want to go back to what you were saying about kind of that gratuitous violence and, how how that has evolved and things like that. I used to think I was desensitized to everything because, like I said, I love the Saw franchise. The first 4 or 5 movies of that franchise I thought were so masterful in the storytelling. I loved what they did with timelines. I love what they did to kind of create a different kind of villain that terrified you, but you were also like, he kind of has a point, I guess.
Especially when Jigsaw rails against the medical system and Saw 5.
Yeah. So what the thing about Saw is that so many people do look at it and see just all of this gratuitous violence, and I agree that it feels unnecessary, but I also like how I'm challenged by it, breaching kind of that idea of well, man, if it were between my life and my hand, what would I pick, So I do like that it raises those questions about the extent of how far a person will go to save their own life, or also that kind of questions about how do we punish people in our society? Is it the right way to punish people? Are people not being punished when they should be? And not that I believe in I flip-flop on the death penalty all the time, but those things interest me, those questions interest me, and I can probably sit down in an empty room for hours thinking about this kind of thing.
Yeah.
What pissed me off about was the most recent Saw film.
Tell us how you really feel about everything, Shannon.
Welcome to this episode of What Pissed Shannon Off.
Have you seen any of the Saw franchise?
Yeah, I saw probably the first 3 or 4.
Okay, Hal?
I used to love them, and actually my friend Steve and I used to make it a point when I'd visit him in Connecticut regularly. Every Halloween we'd go out and see a Saw movie because we were really into them. Have not seen any of the ones since the Saw 6 in 3D, which was the one that brought Carrie Ells back into the mix.
Oh, okay.
Because I haven't really...
Well, as long as you've seen the first couple, it's totally fine. So I saw the most recent film, which was called Spiral, and it was Oh,
is this the Chris Rock one?
The Chris Rock one. So first of all, I was skeptical about Chris Rock, but I thought he actually performed really well in the film. I liked how they kind of gave him an edge, and he took it on with grace and dignity. But they also gave him a couple of comedic moments, but they weren't regular Chris Rock comedy. It was kind of I'm an edgy detective with trauma, and I'm gonna do a dark joke here and there, and it's okay, that's kind of nice. So they had Chris Rock in it, they had Samuel L. Jackson in it. I was those are some interesting picks for the Saw franchise, but go off. And what pissed me off about it is, as I had said, the first few films were just masterful in their storytelling. I cannot say enough how much I pride myself on kind of catching on to little hints and things like that. And so if a movie can actually surprise me, I get really excited. The Saw franchise did that a bunch of times in the first few films, and I loved it. This film, Spiral, I wrote the movie in the first 5 minutes of watching it. I was like, and then this is going to happen, and then this is going to happen. And I was like, I better be in the credits of this thing, because I was like, and again, if I had spent money on that movie, I would have been pissed. I don't even think I would have stayed for the whole thing. But
and that's the danger with all the franchises. Yeah. Because, they get into this thing, it's an expectations game, where they want to satisfy the audience, so they have to, they know that they need to hit the same beats that they did previously. Simultaneously, they know they have to exceed the expectations too. They have to have more grandiose kills. They have to have bigger stars. They have to justify the existence of the sequel. And I think what often happens is you get into a situation where it just becomes more outrageous each time out, and the further you get away from the humanity that was in the original movie. Because I remember the first Saw movie, it was, number one, it had these really interesting, devices that would ultimately kill you, but it also had, it touched upon some societal things, which I don't think it was necessarily sophisticated in its treatment of addiction, for example.
No.
But I remember one of the kills was someone who was addicted to heroin, and they had to extract their arm. They were given a choice between a needle and saving their lives, which again is not a great way to handle that, but an interesting one, and kind of taking a metaphor and literalizing it, which I think is one thing that horror movies can do well, is serving as an allegory for some bigger point. But then, of course, the further you get into the franchise, the less interesting it gets.
And what I hated about it, too, was that, and what I hate about what happens when you pull out a franchise for too much, and of course, I know all three of us probably agree on this point, because we're snobs, is that, sometimes a franchise should just die. And, it's just too much at this point. I feel the same way about the Halloween films. They should have ended at X point. I feel that way about TV shows. A lot of people talk about Supernatural should have ended after season 5, because that was when it was supposed to end. And if you keep beating the franchise, it's going to become derivative. And that's what got me about Spiral, was that I was like, you've done this all before. All of these twists and turns were in previous and we're talking about 7 different films that preceded this film. And I was like, listen, you should have just left it be. I mean, go back in time and put Chris Rock in one of the old ones. I would have been fine with that, but my goodness.
A crazy idea. Chris Rock is actually a very good actor.
Yes, right? I'm glad you said that.
He's gotta be in more stuff.
Between Fargo most recently, and then what was it, 2 Days in Paris? Did you see that movie he did with Julie Delpy a couple of years ago? Also fantastic. He is, much like his friend Adam Sandler, I believe, a criminally underrated real actor.
Give Chris Rock his own new film.
Yeah.
And
there is something to be said for a versatile actor. There are some comedians out there who really just cannot expand their talents into other genres. But, Chris Rock, I don't think he's had enough opportunities to flex that muscle. One comic that has had that opportunity, Jim Carrey has had that opportunity a couple of times. He's been in some
mixed
thrillers.
Results, but Eternal Sunshine is still my favorite Valentine's Day movie to watch. Because there's not a lot of Valentine's Day movies out there, but that's just one of the most, in my opinion, expert filmmaking, storytelling movies.
Preview of our Valentine's Day special episode.
We'll have to have you back just for every holiday to talk about movies, Wallace.
Be a thing.
So going away from the Saw franchise, because we were talking about body horror and gore and all that, and part of my Shudder subscription, I was just going through all these movies that I'd wanted to see but just hadn't for a while, and The Terrifier came up, which
I want to see that.
So Terrifier is, I had heard it was incredibly gory, and it was that was its whole thing. It was very cruelly gory in a lot of cases, and I think you as a woman might be especially horrified by some of the deaths in there, Shannon.
Oh, man.
I was horrified, but at its core, it was actually an excellent suspense film, an excellent, it turns into sort of a cat and mouse game in the second half. There are a couple of twists and turns around the way. It's mostly single location. I love single location horror movies. And I thought that overall it was a very well put together movie with good special effects, good acting. But just some of the deaths were so like gorily cruel. And the only reason I watched it is like there's reports now that Terrifier 2 has people like puking in the audience. So I was morbidly curious.
I mean, like, I don't need that. But this is going back to like what I said before is like I don't find myself being like particularly not offended is not the right word, but like I guess I'm going to keep using the word desensitized is like I've just seen so many horror movies at this point. Saw the whole Saw franchise. Some of them I've watched multiple times. And so it doesn't really bother me much anymore. But something really interesting that I found is that apparently I have a line because I love to read and how we've talked about this before, like how much I love to read. And last year I tried to read American Psycho.
Oh, yeah.
I could not finish it. It was so vulgar. It was so like, and I'm okay. Like, okay, I'm not.
I think you mentioned this on Pat George's podcast because I think I've heard you talk about this. Before.
Well, and so I was about to say that I don't mind a little sexism, but that taken out of context is not what I want to say. What I mean to say is like I can handle being offended. I can handle like this is a villain. They have really shitty views and I can be in the same space as that without like usually being like hurt emotionally. But that book hurt me in ways that I cannot describe. And then I went to go to watch the movie and it was I didn't even finish the book. I want to say the movie wasn't like I actually did finish the movie, but that was one of those films that like I felt that was gratuitous. I felt it wasn't necessary to be just so far into darkness as it was.
Well, that's like Christian Bale had I think it was Christian Bale. I forget what came first in this, but they specifically wanted a woman to direct American Psycho for that reason because like I have not read American Psycho, but I've heard there's like sewing of rats inside of people and things like that.
I didn't even get to that point.
Yeah, and that actually one of the deaths, like just a quick tangent, that shook me the most in any horror movie was in Sinister 2. There's a sequence in which the sinister demon gets rats to burrow through people to kill them, which I don't know why, but that just shook me so badly when I saw that particular.
That made me cringe when I read 1984. Was the rats.
I never read it 1984. So.
Oh, well, maybe you don't want to read it because there's rats and they do nasty things.
To introduce a little drama here, I actually disagree with you on American.
Oh,
yeah.
We're about to fight in the booth.
I think Mary Harron, the director, like that movie is squarely pitched as satire.
Oh, I think that
it is a commentary on a specific place, a specific time, and a specific ethos of like 1980s materialism on Wall Street.
I mean, I recognize that for sure, and I recognize why the story exists, and I'm not saying it shouldn't be there. I'm just saying that for me, like it crossed a line with me specifically.
So was it still the movie? Because I got the impression it was mostly the book.
It was mostly the book.
Yeah.
The movie, I guess maybe because I'm a firm believer in reading the book before watching the film, and then maybe I just was too far hurt by the book to really enjoy the film.
So
So I think maybe I was influenced by that. I do agree that it's a well done film. I think it is well done. I understand, like I said, I understand why it exists because the social commentary is very important. And I think it touches on a lot of issues. And you said it is satire for a lot of the issues that are in our society. Violence against women, addiction, violence against people experiencing homelessness. A lot of that is amplified so much in that story that it just kind of like I didn't enjoy watching it play out. That was what it was for me. It wasn't so much that I don't think the story should exist. It was just like it depressed me. It's like you can kill all the people you want, but you start telling me what's wrong with this world, I'm out.
And see, I lean into like that's my favorite kind of horror movie are the horror movies that like take something real from our world, from our family dynamics, and then exploit it. Like in American Psycho, kind of the point is, in a world that is so rife with narcissism and self-regard, nobody notices that there's a serial killer in their midst because they're all messed up people.
But it's interesting too, though, because I've read, what I love to do is when I've read a very interesting book or seen a very interesting film, I then dive into the rabbit hole of like criticisms, analysis, all that kind of stuff. And one of the analysis that actually I think now that I see, this is the ADHD kicking in. Now that I think about it, anybody ever see the YouTuber Thug Notes?
No idea what that is.
As soon as you say YouTuber, that excludes me from the conversation.
I'm sorry. But listen, if you want to laugh, this is good.
Thug Notes.
It's this guy who. He's black and he does like book reviews. Like he does a plot summary and then an analysis, and he's in this library looking setting of, and then the music that starts it off goes da 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 da, and so he I think he did do American Psycho in that one. In his channel, and it's really funny just because of like the way he speaks, because it's Thug Notes, so he's all gangster and everything, and it's really hard for me to explain this YouTube to people because it makes me feel incredibly racist. But you're
doing a medium job of not coming across as racist. It sounds like this
YouTuber is playing upon the racism of his audience.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's very much a satire, like American Psycho.
Right. So
yeah, it all comes full circle.
Anyway, American Psycho. I can focus. It's fine. One of the kind of analysis of it, though, is like, is Patrick Bateman, did he actually commit any of those crimes? Right? And
I've heard the book is a lot more explicit that he did, but the movie is much more open. It's very open-ended.
And that's part of why I like the ambiguity. He could be a serial killer in the movie, or this could have all been in his head, and he's just, he's navigating this world, and there's also some like interesting gay subtext to the movie.
Oh yeah.
I
think the whole business
I need to
card
return
incident.
some videos to this. Something I wanted to bring up too, like speaking of it all being in his head, one of my absolute favorite directorial choices of all time comes from American Psycho, and it comes from the interview segments with Willem Dafoe, are you familiar with this story, Wallace?
Yeah.
So what it is Willem Dafoe was directed to do 3 different kinds of takes in those interviews. One was like completely aloof and doesn't understand Patrick Bateman is a killer, completely neutral, and then very suspicious and knows Patrick is a killer. And then Mary Harron shot all 3 and then just edited them together cattywampus so that the audience doesn't know if he knows or not, and Patrick Bateman's own psychosis is at work there too.
Yeah.
And that is one of my favorite ideas for directing a scene.
That's the Kuleshov effect, where you can take
it is
the same insert shot and then pair it against a performance that is the identical, and depending on how you edit it, that can determine the audience's reaction to that shot. The famous example is you take a picture of like an older man.
Yeah.
You pair that against a photo of like a grandchild, and you're like, oh, it's a doting grandfather. But then you pair it up against a teenage girl, and you're like, oh, that guy's a pervert. It's all about the counterpoints. Anyway, this has been a distraction from the main conversation.
This is just kind of how depression vacation goes.
It all counts. It all counts.
When we were first starting this podcast, I think ADHD something was also thrown around because we're sort of like, we always go off on tangents. So tangents make for the best conversation.
And that's why we don't have a script for this thing. Because I would not do well with that.
So speaking of no script and going back, there was something I wanted to talk about horror-wise that is not a movie. Or it will, actually, it sort of plays into this a little bit because there will be a movie of it soon. But my absolute favorite horror anything, and one of my like 3 favorite stories I've seen in any modern media, is the media for Silent Hill 2, which are either of you familiar with the story behind that?
I saw the first Silent Hill film.
I'm talking about the video, not the films.
I have not played the video game.
So, similar to what John Carpenter tried to do unsuccessfully with Halloween, for Silent Hill 2, the creators of the game decided that there were hundreds of different stories to tell in this hellish town, and they didn't want to focus on the characters of the mythology from the first one. So they created an introspective, almost Grecian tragedy video game that follows the protagonist, James Sunderland, who's the main character, is a widower who lost his wife to a really terrible disease 3 years ago. And he receives a mysterious letter from her at one point saying to meet her in their favorite place, which is Silent Hill, this seaside town. And he gets there, and the entire town is nothing but a nightmarescape of all of his own psychoses, creatures that are directly created to resemble his repressed sexuality from being married to a terminally ill woman for years, characters who are representations of his own psychosis and his resentment for having to take care of his wife, and like a twist ending and a overall scarescape that was the greatest thing I ever saw. And apparently they are adapting that into a movie with Christoph Gans sometime in the near future, which was part of like the Silent Hill everything experience. But that's the interesting thing about horror video games in general is that they take what's best of the found footage, I think, and best of like traditional narrative, and they put you sort of in control of it. Like I have friends who have had to watch me play the Silent Hill games because they want to see the story, but they physically can't play those games because it's too scary for them to be in control of those things. So yeah.
You know what's interesting to me is that kind of the idea of like what scares me, because on occasion there are horror films that will actually scare me, and that's but it's few and far between. I don't know that I've ever tried to play a horror video game, so I think I'm going to do that and tell you how it goes. But I will tell you, I've never been afraid reading a horror book. And what's really funny is that, like, I think all the time about that Friends episode where Joey keeps The Shining in the freezer. First of all, I read The Shining, and I did not think it needed to go into the freezer. But I'm also wondering, like, what book will be my freezer book?
I'm trying to think. I don't think I've ever read a book that scared me so...
Like, reading, for some reason, doesn't stimulate fear in my brain.
So I have one, but it's not a novel. It's a series of short stories. And some of them were very, like, so I'm very much into the Hellraiser mythology and, like, those movies, even though the quality varies greatly with... Did
you watch the new one? I haven't yet.
Yes.
Was it good?
I thought it was okay. It was... It had interesting wrinkles to the overall mythology and was scary in some places, but they didn't really show off the new Cenobites very much, and, like...
Unnecessary sequel alert.
I actually would like...
Or remake, actually. Well, yeah, whatever they consider this thing to be.
I guess?
Well, it's...
Because it's still in the same...
It's similar to the Halloween reboot that David Gordon Green did, where it's like...
Not Noah Baumbach.
It's kind of it's kind of a sequel, but it's also kind of a reboot.
So there's more of a story behind why I am fine with them rebooting Hellraiser, and it all has to do with Clive Barker getting the rights back to his own work. Because he did not own the rights to any of the Hellraiser movies past the first one. In fact... Hellbound Hearts was like a almost tertiary novel he wrote that he wasn't expecting to become a phenomenon. And he tried for years to get the rights back to it. And they kept just making these terrible Hellraiser movies nobody was supposed to see to retain the rights for whatever company owns them. Right. And he finally got them back and got his people in place, and this is the movie he wanted to make. So
that makes me sad because I really didn't like that movie.
It wasn't...
He pulled a Taylor Swift.
I did not hate it. I did not like... I would like to see another of these movies to see where they go from here. But like, it felt like most of the movie was unnecessary young teen actors just puddling around in the middle of the movie.
Yeah, the first one was very just like out there.
That's one I almost didn't finish because the sequence where I don't remember his name. Hal's better with names. The guy who comes back from the hellscape.
Oh, Frank, yeah.
Frank, yeah, there we go. When he is resurrected, that I actually, when I first sat down to watch the Hellraiser movie, I saw the beginnings of that, and I was like, no, thank you, and I turned it off.
They have a baby crying as he's resurrected, too, which is horrifying.
It's so, it was, I felt that was unnecessary.
Some of the best visual effects you will see from an 80s movie, by the way, because that was all stop motion.
I don't know. Best is relative.
Oh my God, I think that's so horrifying. Like the Frank resurrection scene where like the skull comes out and he's like back from hell in his like mangled body. I think it scares me. That's I guess where I'm going with this.
But in the original, you've got all this like really just like interesting kind of squicky queer subtext with BDSM and like addiction. Like you can easily map a meaning onto aspects of that story. In this new one, the new Hellraiser, just, again, it kind of felt perfunctory to me.
Yeah.
It felt like, okay, you've got these interesting devices, and you open it, and then it sets you on a path to your damnation. There didn't seem to be much of a point to it.
It felt like, so one of the things I didn't like about it is that the lament configuration in the best of the Hellraiser movies is a very intentional device. Like, people don't accidentally, I mean, some people accidentally open it, like Kirsty in the first movie, but it's very rare. It's mostly like seeking out people like Frank, who are super depraved, looking for the ultimate thrill and get it, and then don't like what they get. And in the new Hellraiser movie, like, whenever you touch the box, sometimes like a little knife will come out, take your blood, and then whoops, the Cenobites are going to come and get you. It was a trap. And that was not the pathos of why the box existed in the original movies. It was more like, this is what you wanted, this is what you're getting, as opposed to, whoops, gotcha.
Yeah, and it kind of offers you something that you want in exchange for your, like, getting deeper into this thing.
Yeah.
And I don't think they quite got the subtext, and in some cases text, that was in the original work is like not quite there in this remake.
And this is why, like, going slightly back to how this conversation started, this is why I love the book Hellbound Hearts, which is a collection of about 20 short stories that Clive Barker arranged from prominent writers like Neil Gaiman, and there's a few other big ones in there too. And it's supposed to be in the Hellraiser mythos with the one rule that Pinhead could not be in any of the stories because he's too ubiquitous with the overall story. Or he or she, I guess Pinhead is now at this point. But there were a lot of stories like that where it was very much like people seeking out more than they could handle. And some of those did scare me. And those are like the only short stories I can think of, or novels, that scared me in that respect. Yeah.
So what's the scaredest you've ever been?
The rootin' tootin'est scaredest I've ever been.
Are we talking movie or like overall?
What is
Halloween?
the most scared? That's the right one. Most scared. Well, I mean, like from movie, film, whatever.
Most scared I've ever been was Event Horizon, which was a movie I was going to talk about, but this conversation was so good, we're running low on time as it is. So Event Horizon, my parents rented it when I was in 7th grade, thinking it was like the Dustin Hoffman movie Sphere, or like a nice space adventure. And it turned out to be one of the most terrifying fucking movies I've ever seen, complete with like blood orgies and like all sorts of sexual like body horror.
I'm wondering if I like, because I saw Event Horizon, and because people told me it was like the scariest thing they'd ever seen.
Oh my God, yes.
And I've seen it, and I did not have that reaction.
So it's
did I watch a different film?
It's tamer by today's standard, but you didn't see like the scene where they see what happens to the previous crew, like liberate tutte me ex inferis.
I don't know. Maybe I was drunk when I watched it. Maybe I just have to go back and watch it again.
Yeah, because that's the whole like
undesensitize yourself.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to do I just watch Teletubbies for 3 years and then maybe I'll be okay?
You just watch romantic comedies until your brain regrows.
Oh,
It's Sleepless in Seattle
or
again.
Hallmark Christmas movies.
With a prince.
Oh my God.
That'll be another episode.
Wallace, what's the scaredest?
Well, because I can't ever give you just one. The first movie I remember scaring me was Jaws.
Okay.
Watching it on TNT, even in the edited format. The moment where the head pops out of the boat, I was just like, I'm out. I must have been like 6 or 7 years old. I was too young to be watching Jaws, but TV was my babysitter, and it scared the bejesus out of me. And I remember I turned off the TV, which was a no-no, because I was like, no, this is evil. I can't continue watching this.
Too many sharks.
Even at that age. And then, like, probably the most effective horror movie, I think, is still The Shining by Kubrick.
That's interesting. I've never actually been afraid while watching The Shining.
Oh, it does something to me. It is, and I think it's a movie that grows with you.
Yeah, definitely.
Because I think when you see it as a young person, you're only watching it for the gore. You're only watching it for like the elevators opening and unleashing a torrent of blood. But then the older you get, like I remember the first time I watched it, I did not pick up on the fact that the kid was being abused by his dad.
Oh, I still didn't. Oh, but that's that's in the original book. Okay.
It's and it's there. It's basically text. It's not even subtext. But when you watch it as a horror movie, you're really only watching it through one lens. If you watch it through the lens of a story about addiction and abuse, you find all of this additional complexity to that story.
I'm going to have to watch it for the 20 millionth time.
Yeah, like early on, before they get to the hotel, that whole initial part, which I think for most people, it's just like they mind wipe it out of their head because they don't remember anything that happened before the stuff in the hotel.
I think maybe my mistake is focusing on the hotel and focusing on the ghosts. And I think what I need to do is watch it with the lens of watching the family.
So I have a very complicated relationship with The Shining in general because so my dad was a huge fan of the book in general and hated the movie. And his reasons for hating the movie, I think, are very valid. Like, because the first time I saw The Shining was actually the miniseries they did with Steven Weber in the 90s, which I used to have on DVD but might have gotten rid of, which is very much focused on, like you were saying, the human aspect of the horror, like his addiction, the ghosts in the Overlook, and his confliction as the ghosts are trying to get him to murder his son for their own gain, and like eventually the love of his son that turns him around, which none of that is present in The Shining.
Right.
But also, I understand that, like, if you have an hour and a half to tell a complicated treatise on addiction, love, and child-father relationships, that's a tough thing to do in an hour and a half. So Kubrick just went for straight horror, which I think is very effective as well.
I disagree with that, though. I don't think he went for straight horror. I think what he was doing is, Stephen King famously hated the first movie.
I can see why.
And he loved the miniseries because the miniseries...
He's in the miniseries, too.
Yeah, the miniseries was more of a straight adaptation of Stephen King's book. And Stephen King's book...
I didn't know there was a miniseries.
Yeah.
It kind of came and went. It barely got released on DVD, and I snatched it up as soon as it was because I figured it was going to go back to the vault very quickly.
I believe it's Rebecca De Mornay as Wendy.
Yeah,
and she's actually very good. Rebecca De Mornay, hats off to you. I wish you were in more movies.
There's also Elliot Gould in there.
But in the book, a lot of the stuff about abuse and addiction is text. Mm-hmm. It's like very obvious. There are long passages about this, and it's pretty obvious that the protagonist is really struggling. When Kubrick got the material, he did something which I think is really interesting. He that stuff is still there, but it's more like an undercurrent. Mm-hmm. It's more like you get the sense that there's something seriously off, but it's always kind of on the periphery. It's a distraction. And I think that's in some ways it's more effective to have these quick moments where you're like, "Ooh, there's something wrong with Jack." I mean, I don't think the character's name not Jack, right?
Yeah,
oh yeah, Jack Torrance is his name.
It is. Yeah. Okay, all right. I thought I was conflating that with Jack Nicholson.
All work and no play.
Yeah, but that there's something wrong with this guy, and from the very opening scenes, it's intimated that there's something going on between the father and the son. They have, if I'm not mistaken, there's a social worker who shows up.
Yeah.
So it's there, and then very quickly you're given this ghost story, and Kubrick is counting on the audience to forget. And then it comes back again as Jack is drinking and getting deeper into his mental health crisis. But fundamentally, The Shining is about family trauma and mental illness and addiction. And I think it really works well as a suspense film on that level. And simultaneously, it really works well as almost like a gratuitous slasher film, too. Mm. It has these levels to it where it captures the best of what a gore film can be and the best of what a psychological horror can be.
It adapted a couple of the ideas in the book that I thought were a little nuttier into better representations. Like in the book, for instance, the hedge creatures that are made out of like all the hedges come to life and try to kill Danny. And Kubrick's adaptation of that was the hedge maze, which actually was one of the parts I thought was significantly better and scarier, just the way that all played out in The Shining. Like, Yeah, we didn't need hedge monsters coming to this party.
Yeah, and the movie is arguably from the point of view of the kid, which, if I'm not mistaken, the book is more from the point of view of the dad.
Oh, it's definitely Jack's story because it's Stephen King was going through so much addiction at the time. It's like a complicated allegory for his own thing.
By putting it
wow, that's
into...
so out of character for Stephen King.
Who inserts himself into the Dark Tower series as a main character.
But by shifting it from the perspective of the dad to the son, I think makes it much more effective, makes it much more horrific, because the consequences of the dad's actions aren't fully understood by the son, and ergo aren't fully understood by the audience.
Did you ever hear the story about like how Kubrick shot that with the kid too?
Yes.
Yeah, like he pretended it was a different kind of movie because he didn't want to scar the kid for life, and he didn't realize it was a horror movie until he grew up and watched it.
Yeah.
So, yeah. A lot of good layers with The Shining.
Yeah. No, and I do love The Shining. The Shining is still one of my top favorite horror films. So there are two recent movies that actually like kind of left me unsettled. And one of them, which battles The Shining for me, Hereditary.
Yes.
Oh, I have. So
Dude.
Yes.
I only just recently watched Midsommar for the first time, and Hereditary is next on my list. So I haven't seen it, but
I'm not going to spoil it for you.
Oh, thank God.
But I mean, because honestly, you need to see this film. I have said it, and I don't know if it's a hot take, but I think it's our generation's The Exorcist.
Yeah, actually, I was talking with Mike O'Donnell about this the other day because he was saying also Hereditary was a must-see movie.
It is. It really, I mean, the acting is phenomenal. I was surprised by the twist, and like I thought about it for weeks after seeing it.
I will say, for Hereditary, and I gave this warning to my partner as well, because he has not seen Hereditary yet.
I'm surprised at that.
Yeah, it is a deeply upsetting movie. That is not about what it's like The Shining. It's not about what it says it's about. It's really about something else, which is family trauma. And I don't want to step on your shoes.
Wow, it's so weird how I keep enjoying these films about family trauma. It's almost like there's some unintended consequences that are taking effect on my life.
It's interesting because Midsommar, like, I really enjoyed that movie a lot.
Which is also about family trauma.
No. Yeah, well, I was reading, like, the more I was reading, because I've seen that about 3 times now, because it really stuck with me for some reason.
How is it that you've seen Midsommar 3 times but not seen Hereditary?
I like to digest movies I like a lot to figure out what I liked about them, and like reading a lot of things about Midsommar, they said it's just a breakup movie essentially, and like looking at all of the like context clues and everything, I'm like, yeah, I can see this as like a complicated metaphor for breaking up with somebody in a bad relationship by getting into an even worse relationship with someone else.
But see,
I don't think that's not what got it for me. I don't think I took away that lesson from the film. I felt that the relationship between the main female lead and her boyfriend, like it really took a back seat for me, because it really just felt like it was a story about her processing the trauma and realizing that the relationships in her life were not conducive to her processing that and taking agency.
Yeah.
And I feel that when she did, in a twisted way, she found agency. Yeah. And that's what I don't think it so much had to do with the relationship as much as it did about her identity crisis.
Yeah, the relationship with the boyfriend is kind of illustrative of a bigger point. And it's not a spoiler to say Midsommar is about a catastrophic thing that happens to the protagonist in the first 10 minutes of the movie.
Which was one of the, most moving and impactful scenes of film I've ever seen.
Yeah, I wasn't sure I'd even seen what I just saw when that happened.
Yeah, and my lens through which I view Midsommar is it's about the madness of grief, which I have personal experience with. It is about, as you said, Shannon, it's about this protagonist going through the stages of grief, but not having the support network to actually go through them successfully. And so what happens when you don't have support and you're in the middle of grieving? a significant trauma in your life, well, you end up doing some crazy, destructive, self-destructive things. And that's fundamentally what happens for the rest of that movie is you're watching this woman go through the stages of grief without having a support network. And that is horrifying.
Yeah.
And to be saddled with a boyfriend who just doesn't understand in the
has
middle
no
of
empathy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't even want to be there.
Right.
Just
doesn't
like-
want her to be there. And that's a big part of it for me as well, is from someone who has gone through a very unique life experience, is when you find yourself in a relationship with someone who not only can never understand what you've been through, but absolutely refuses to even try or emotionally connect in that sense. Like, that is a terrifying thought. And, you know, it's that person in your life other than your family that are supposed to give you that emotional support. And so that really spoke to me on that level as well, where the whole relationship was, I mean, she had to go through this really terrible experience and then had to navigate these other really terrible things that were happening to her in this relationship and then further on into the film.
Yeah, I really connected with Midsommar.
Me
And
too,
Florence
yeah.
Pugh, I mean, what a queen. I'm sorry.
my life story is very different from the actual plot, but it was similar.
I hope so.
It was similar in this respect that I had this major like traumatic thing happen in the middle of college, and nobody in my orbit could possibly understand. You know, and watching that play out, you know, in some ways you could view Midsommar as a triumph for this character. But of course, a lot of things happen along the way that are just deeply messed up.
Well, that was what the end is supposed to symbolize, that she's triumphed, because her like horror turns into a smile like at the last thing. So it's like,
but is it a triumph?
That's the
because
great
she's joined a cult. Spoiler.
Yeah.
So anyway, before we run out of time, I did want to hear, like, Wallace, what is your favorite horror movie? I don't think we actually got to your like favorite one on the spot right now.
Well, I think it probably is The Shining. You know, in terms of a whole movie, one of my it's definitely up there in terms of my top favorite horror movie. I would also just toss out there like Kiyoshi Kurosawa's Cure, which I'm not sure if either of you have seen.
Have not seen.
Japanese film. Similar themes to what we've been discussing, surprise to surprise. And oh man, you're putting me on the spot. I have a whole list.
I know we got so far away from
Demon laptop.
from all of these discussions during here. I just wanted to make sure that like we had you on the record talking about your movies before we end today.
Well, another two that I wanted to shout out, because I'm not going to go for the obvious ones. There are obvious ones that we could be talking about, and some of which we've already talked about, but two more that I'll just toss out there if people want to have a good time and watch a movie that very few people have seen. John Frankenheimer, the guy who directed The Manchurian Candidate, which I kind of see as a little bit of a horror movie, and pour some out for our girl Angela Lansbury, who just died.
Oh, yes.
Best performance, one of the great performances of all time in Manchurian Candidate. But the same director who did that movie also did a movie called Seconds with Rock Hudson.
Okay.
And it's more of a horror film, and it's about kind of a middle-aged guy who gets an opportunity to completely change himself, to be youthful again, to be a young person, and he completely abandons his family, changes his face, and then suffers the consequences of that decision.
Sounds very Lynchian, actually.
Yeah, I would not be surprised if David Lynch was inspired by this movie. And it came out in the mid-'60s. It's just fabulous, and not enough people have seen it.
So Seconds, I'm going to add that to my list and see if I can stream.
And another one that's like really out there is Kanedo Shindo's Onibaba. It's another movie from the 60s, Japanese film, and it's based in part on a Buddhist kind of fable in which a woman pretends to be a demon to scare her daughter straight.
Oh.
And the mask gets stuck to the woman's face.
Oh.
And the movie itself, I'm not going to go into the details of the plot, but it's a riff on that folktale.
Okay.
And it is fabulous. It's complex and spooky and legit scary. So
Onibaba. I'm
Onibaba.
going to remember that one too.
I put it on my list, so I'll make sure I send it over to you.
I guess just in summary, like not to talk for too long, but like the two movies I guess I didn't really get to mention that I really enjoy. The Houses That October Built is sort of a really offbeat. Has anybody seen that movie here?
No.
So it's a mockumentary style. It's like sort of Blair Witchy, but what it is a bunch of friends who are going around the country doing documentaries specifically on scare houses, and are looking for like the most extreme scare houses to go into their documentary to make it really cool, and keep like going further and further down a cycle of like blackout houses.
I have seen that one.
It's not the greatest movie in the world, but for some reason, it's just very good Halloween fun. They go to a lot of different sort of scare houses with lots of themes. It does get pretty scary, I think, at the end. It has a sequel, which isn't really that great, but I still watch both of them every Halloween. And also in that respect, too, I just wanted to give a shout out to Blair Witch Project, because I do... If you're talking about something that terrified me as a kid, the movie didn't terrify me quite as much. But like reading their website in preparation for the movie, I got kind of obsessed with them when I was like 13 years old. And I was scared to walk alone in my neighborhood at night after reading all of the Blair Witch mythology. And I still think that's one of the better put together independent movies. It might actually be the most profitable movie of all time still, I think. But I really enjoy Blair Witch for what it brought to the table and like how they did it.
I have just a couple just really fast things. Number one,
we're running out of tape on this digital platform.
I know. Number one, that scene in Nightmare on Elm Street where she's in the high school and she's going down the hallway and she sees a body bag, and then all of a sudden the legs of the body bag lift up and gets pulled off screen. That scared the shit out of me. Number two, Gerald's Game on Netflix.
Ooh, more Stephen King.
Beautiful. Yeah. Such a great film, first of all. But The Moonlight Man, it scared the shit out of me. Could not close my eyes for about a day or two without seeing that terrifying person. So that'll do it for me. And then another one from way back, The House on Haunted Hill.
Oh yes. I just watched that the other day again. And I love that movie.
You know the scene I'm talking about? That scared the shit out of me. So yeah, just wanted to share a couple of those.
Out of curiosity, what scene is it? Because there are a lot of good ones in that movie.
They go into...
Also, are you talking about the original or the remake?
The original.
Oh, no. I'm talking about the remake.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I like both of them for different reasons.
I didn't know there was a remake.
Oh, it's very...
I'm going to have to check it out.
It's very much a product of the 90s, but it was one of the first horror movies that really scared me because they went the whole, twitchy face ghost route, and... There's a lot of good horror in there, and then a horrible CG monster to end it. But
I think I know what scene you're talking about. But Shannon, finish that thought.
Sorry,
because it's great. About House on Haunted Hill.
House on Haunted Hill, delightful movie, delightful film. It had, we laughed, we cried. It was beautiful. The scene in the one room where all of a sudden you turn around and there's the most terrifying thing you've ever seen in your life. And it just, and I'm desensitized to jump scares, but for some reason, the beautiful mastery of the filmography there was just amazing.
Also, it is filmed in a Frank Lloyd house, Frank Lloyd Wright house in Los Angeles, and it pairs two of my obsessions, film and architecture, together.
It was a fantastic film.
Speaking of jump scares, has anybody seen Exorcist 3 here?
No.
Exorcist 3.
I only saw the first one.
I know what scene you're talking about.
Exorcist 3, if you feel like watching a movie, there are a lot of good parts. It's an uneven movie. It's a pretty good sequel for the most part. It has the best jump scare I think I have ever seen in any movie. The first time I watched that, I think I was 16 or 17 when it was on TV, I couldn't finish watching the movie the first time because it just shook me so much. The greatness, the level of misdirection that it has. I won't say what it is, or you could just watch it on YouTube, but yeah.
If there were a video of us, you would see me doing the hedge clipper motion.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good in that movie for a second sequel too.
We could... I love this. I love that we've all gotten together to have this episode. I think this was one of my favorites so far.
This is going to be an extra long episode, too. Let us go 15 minutes longer than we were supposed to. Just because the conversations were so good.
It is so good. And Wallace, thank you so much for joining us for this. This has been fantastic.
Thank you for having me.
Wallace McKelvey, who recently just won Best Acting for his VidJam movie. You want to talk about that real quick before we go?
Yeah. So I had a fantastic ensemble together for this latest VidJam of horror. And I couldn't be there for the actual event, but I've caught up with some of the other submission teams after the fact, and I don't know. I go check out my YouTube. Just look up Wallace McKelvey. You'll find me, and give it a watch. I just uploaded it. I'm super proud of it, and I'm super proud of the team that we brought together. The performances are just, yeah.
Lots of quality movies on there, including his big winner, Congregation, which was the Harrisburg VidJam, like big taker homer. And then Where the Sun Doesn't Ever Shine was another one of my favorite ones, which was another horror submission like 3 years ago. So lots of good movies on Wallace McKelvey's YouTube. You should check it out.
I'm humbled. Thank you, Hal.
Yeah, it was so just as a quick aside, I haven't seen your movie yet because I only got to see the last 4 since I was working. However, I talked to my sister, Christy, shout out, because yesterday was her birthday.
Shout out.
Yeah,
shout out.
I gave her a phone call yesterday, and she was like, oh yeah, I watched Wallace's horror VidJam that he posted, and I really liked it. She hasn't watched mine yet, but she watched yours. Well, anyway, Wallace, thank you so much for coming. We'll have to have you back to talk about holiday movies for every major holiday from now on.
Fun.
I'm into it.
All right, well, this has been a fantastically extra long episode of Depression Vacation, where we actually didn't talk about problems too much, so it really was a vacation from our problems.
We did it.
I've been Hal.
I've been Shannon.
I've been Wallace.
And thank you all so much, and we'll see you next time.